So we've talked a little bit about our BIOS, and we've talked a bit about the firmware installed on our BIOS, and we've also talked about what it stands for, Basic Input-Output System. Well, now knowing what the BIOS is and what it kind of does, well, where is it on our motherboard? On our motherboard that we have here, we see several chips which right away could potentially be the BIOS. But the best way to narrow down very quickly where the BIOS may be, we can see something that's very obvious on our motherboard, and that's a battery. Now that battery is actually called a CMOS battery. It stands for Complementary Metal Oxide Semiconductor. And that battery provides constant power to the CMOS memory. This CMOS memory sort of works in conjunction with the actual BIOS itself. Whenever you make changes to the BIOS, you change which boot up order you have on your computer, or you change certain selections on the BIOS, that CMOS memory retains that information. And if your computer completely lost every single source of electricity, you would no longer have that saved configurations. So the CMOS battery gives a little bit of backup energy to that. If you notice your computer starts losing time or date, or it seems inconsistent, it may be because that battery is dying and actually needs to be replaced. So because that battery works in conjunction with our BIOS, we can correctly assume that the BIOS is usually somewhere close by, or at least somewhere on the same side of the motherboard. So we'll look closely, and on this particular computer, or on this particular motherboard rather, our BIOS is going to be that chip right there. We notice it's held in on all four sides by pins onto the board, and it has all the firmware on it for turning on our computer and selecting our operating system and everything. What does our BIOS really do for us besides turning on our computer and selecting the operating system? Well, it can actually do a lot. It can give us a lot of information, very useful information. For example, the BIOS can give us component information about the different parts on the inside of our computer and parts that we interact with on a daily basis when we use our computer. So we have all this information in the BIOS. We turn on our computer, but the computer goes straight to the operating system. Well, how do we get into the BIOS? How do we check out that information and see what's going on? It can be different for every computer model, but a good bit of the time, you're going to want to hit the F2 key as the computer's starting up. So we press the power button on our computer, and as it's turning on, we'll just tap that F2 key. Usually we'll hear a beep, and then we may enter our BIOS. Now again, I say may because sometimes on different computer types, different computer manufacturers, it may be a different button. Sometimes it's the escape key. It just really depends. And as you're starting up your computer, usually you'll see a line that says something to the effect of press F2 to set up, or press F2 to enter the BIOS, or press escape to enter the BIOS. And we want to make sure we select that correct key in order to enter the BIOS. If we're completely and totally befuddled, we can go and do a search for our computer type, make and model, and which key we need to use to enter the BIOS. And that may help us out if we're having some problems. So now we've entered the BIOS, and we want to check out some component information. What type of information is it going to show us? For one, we'll have information about our RAM, our random access memory. The BIOS may give us information such as how much is installed, how much is available, which slots on our motherboard are used, and which slots are open. Which type is installed, it may even tell us. Depending on which BIOS version, we may see different amounts of information. But generally, the BIOS will give us information about the RAM. We'll also see information on our hard drive. Our hard drive, of course, being the part of computer that stores information for us. It'll tell us if we just have one installed or multiple, and where onto the motherboard they're attached, which order they're going to boot in. If we have multiple operating systems on multiple hard drives that are installed in our computer, this may actually allow us to disable certain drives as well in order to say we want to boot to the second one instead of the first one. So we have that option. We also have optical drive information. Optical drives being our CD drives, Blu-ray players. Those basically, when you have the discs and you put them into a drive, that's going to be an optical drive. And then, of course, our CPU, our central processing unit. Our BIOS may give us information such as the manufacturer, the type of CPU that we have installed, or the speed and the caching rates of our CPU. And it may give us some options that we can change based on if we want to do overclocking. So there may be a lot of other options and a lot of other configuration information that we see in our BIOS, but these are going to be some standard ones that we can find in there. So just remember, if you want some information possibly about the RAM installed on your computer, the hard drive, optical drive, or the CPU, the BIOS may be one of the places that you want to go, especially if the computer doesn't yet have an operating system installed on it.